When Margaret Dawson opened the cedar-lined wardrobe in the far corner of her bedroom, it creaked the way old trees might if they could talk. The scent of lavender sachets lingered faintly, trapped memories stitched into dried petals and yellowed lace. The light that streamed through the half-open shutters painted the floor with lines, like a silent metronome counting down her hesitation. The dress was still there. Tucked into the far right, wrapped in clear plastic, the fabric looked almost untouched by time. She had worn it once, 38 years ago, at the annual community summer gala, a tradition her late husband insisted on attending every year. It was the kind of dress a woman in her late 20s wore to feel like a woman in full bloom. Back then, she hadn't needed to think much about how it hugged her waist or the way it clung just below her shoulders. Her skin had been firm, her hair still untouched by gray, her laugh untainted by grief. Margaret didn't know why she had pulled it out this morning. She hadn't planned on going anywhere special. She rarely did these days. At 69, the days folded into each other like pages in an unread book. Since Arthur passed, the silence had grown into something almost companion-like. She brewed coffee for one, set the table for none, and sometimes when the house felt too still, she whispered things just to hear her voice again. But this morning something stirred differently. Maybe it was the sunlight hitting the wardrobe at just the right angle. Or maybe it was the dream she had, the one where she was walking barefoot through a meadow in that very dress, Arthur trailing behind her, whistling some forgotten tune. She didn't remember the melody, just the feeling. Free, alive, beloved. So she laid the dress on the bed. She showered slowly, each motion careful, deliberate. She lotioned her arms, not for anyone else, but to remember what it felt like to take care of her own skin. She blow-dried her hair, not to tame it, but to feel the warmth at her roots. Then she sat on the edge of the bed, looked at the dress, and for a moment, hesitated. Would it still fit? She wasn't the woman from 38 years ago. Her shoulders had softened, her arms bore freckles she hadn't always had, and her waist no longer curved in the same places. But there was a fire in her that had never quite gone out. It had just been dimmed by funeral flowers, unanswered phone calls, and long winters without Arthur's humming beside her. She slipped it on. And to her quiet surprise it still fit. Differently, but it fit. She stood before the full-length mirror, the one that had witnessed so many versions of her, and looked. Really looked. There she was. Not the young woman from years past, but someone else entirely. Stronger in some ways, softer in others. The fabric clung to her chest gently, more revealing than she was used to these days. But she didn't pull it up. She let it sit where it was meant to. This wasn't about modesty. This wasn't about anyone else's gaze. This was about her. Margaret walked down the stairs in that dress. She made herself tea and stood on the back porch as birds traced wide arcs across the morning sky. She felt the breeze kiss her collarbone, and for the first time in a long time, she didn't pull a shawl around herself. She stayed there until the sun reached high noon, her shadow shrinking beneath her like a flower folding in reverse. Later that afternoon, she took out her sketchbook. It had been years since she'd drawn anything more than grocery lists. But now, with the dress still clinging to her like a promise, she began to sketch the garden. The way the marigolds opened, the bent willow by the fence, the dragonflies hovering over the birdbath like thoughts she couldn't quite catch. Time softened. She didn't know if anyone would see her in this dress again. It didn't matter. What mattered was that she had chosen to wear it today. Not for a man, not for a memory, not even for a photograph, but for herself. It wasn't about being seen. It was about seeing herself. And as the day stretched gently into twilight, and the first stars blinked through the pinking sky, Margaret sat alone on the porch swing. The wind played with the hem of her dress. And for the first time in what felt like forever, she smiled without sadness sitting on her shoulder.